I think when specifically talking about IDaaS, when you are going down the path of the type of infrastructure you want, I think the venue owner needs to ask themselves a couple questions. You know, the simple ones: who pays for it? Who's going to have the title to it at the end? Who's going to maintain and monitor it? And then with new technologies, who's going to upgrade it if the systems need to be upgraded? And I think once you come up with those answers and you kind of wash that out, then I think you can go down those different paths that you just alluded to.
From a carrier perspective, CNS has been working in the field of providing DaaS solutions to our enterprise customers for over a dozen years. And I think the only thing I would say is while we encourage the growth of an ecosystem of multivariate providers, whether it be OEMs, VARs, neutral host providers, tower codes, et cetera, I wouldn't necessarily discount the carrier in this relationship based on this idea of neutrality.
The whole data consumption and tsunami, so to speak, is really driving a wholesale change in overall DaaS design and networks. And from what Dan and Susan mentioned before, I think it's been really well chronicled that data demand in general is growing far greater than linearly. It's exponential growth year over year. And just to set the framework a little bit before I talk a little bit about how it's changing from an architecture perspective, a couple of statistics from Cisco really helps put it in perspective. On a per month basis, back in 2008, so basically the year after the iPhone was first released, the average user of a smartphone consumed about 36 megabits on a monthly basis. By 2010, so the end of last year, that had grown to 153 megabits on a monthly basis. And by 2015, it's projected to be 1,500 megabits or 1.5 gig on a monthly basis. So what you can see then is really this growth is accelerating year over year, and it's really being driven by a change in usage by the end subscribers.
When outdoor DaaS first began to emerge several years ago, it really looked like an incredibly powerful tool because it had low visual impact. It could locate on existing utility poles by right in many areas, and it was just a matter of designing and optimizing the networks for good coverage along the corridors. But as we know now, the coverage is needed in the home, and the problem that we have is that many local governments are regulating these utility poles as if they were raw land bills. And now what's happening is people that are in suburban communities, many of, again, are highly correlated with where the demand is, are very articulate, very sharp people, and they fight everything. They'll fight a tower, they'll fight a DaaS on a 40-foot wooden pole with literally in a matter of 3 hours, anyone can create a website, create a blog, create an online petition, a Facebook page, and have them all linked to their supervisor and planning commissioner.
I mean, obviously outside the public venues, there's been more RFPs in the last 12 months regarding enterprise solutions. And those verticals, those companies, can range from big manufacturers to really healthcare. We're finding that those enterprises are really interested in having their DaaS. Either they have the budget for it, or B, again, I think I said earlier, they're tied contractually to one or two carriers because there's enough employees through the campus to economically to make sense for the carriers.
The thing that I think is interesting to note is kind of some of the underlying reasons why. And I think a lot of it ultimately is driven back towards the device and the advent of smartphones becoming much more prevalent. Because if you looked at who we all worked with, in years past and working with DaaS solutions, a lot of times in previous years it had been the telco organization within whatever enterprise we're talking about, and then they were bringing facilities from an overall property usage perspective and things along those lines. Well, now with smartphones becoming much more pervasive, the IT organizations within enterprise are taking much more control and involvement around those devices. And in fact, when it comes to overall spend and tracking, the IT organizations, from what we've seen, tend to be much more in the lead position, whereas telco had been previously.
There's a lot of other dynamics happening in the enterprise, I think, beyond just the increased use of mobility applications. One is that there's this I've always been a B2B guy, by the way, so I've always been in marketing and I've always been a B2B guy. I don't know much about the consumer market, but there's this whole new market coming up centered around applications that are B2E, right, business to employee. And what this is driven by is that I think the statistic was something like 76% of knowledge workers today bring their own device to work to do work. So, I mean, I can just maybe take a poll of the audience, maybe afterwards. We can ask how many folks in here bring their own smartphone, their own iPhone, their own iPad to their office outside the IT infrastructure to do some level of work using a common application, or maybe just because it's faster or more convenient. A lot of us travel and probably have a more convenient method to do work on the planes than pulling out these big, gigantic Toshiba laptops with the extra battery and everything. So I think the idea that there's this whole cadre of employees who are bringing their own equipment to work that are outside the IT infrastructure,